Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The brutal winter of 1887 descended upon the Arizona Territory with a vengeance that few had anticipated. Lucas Keller pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he urged his exhausted mare forward through the swirling snow. The temperature had plummeted with the setting sun, and the bitter wind cut through his layers like knives. At 32, Lucas had weathered many storms in his life, both literal and figurative, but this blizzard was testing even his considerable resilience. He had spent the last 8 years building his modest cattle ranch in the valley, determined to forge a life for himself after returning from the war with nightmares that still haunted him and a restlessness that never quite abated. His ranch hands had warned him against riding out to check the northern fence line alone, but Lucas had stubbornly insisted. Now, as darkness fell and the temperature continued to drop, he realized his folly. His fingers, despite the thick gloves, had grown numb, and his face burned from the relentless sting of ice crystals carried on the wind. Just a little further, Penny, he murmured to his mare, leaning forward to stroke her frost-covered mane. The horse snorted, her breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. We'll find shelter soon. But as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Lucas began to fear he had made a fatal miscalculation. The landscape, transformed by snow, had become unrecognizable. His ranch should have come into view by now, or at least the outline of Thompson's property to the east. Instead, there was nothing but an endless expanse of white. The wind picked up, howling through the scrubby pine trees that dotted the hillside. Lucas squinted against the assault, trying to discern any landmark that might guide him home. It was then that he saw it. A faint, flickering light in the distance, barely visible through the curtain of snow. Hope surged through him, followed quickly by caution. He was far from any established homestead he knew of. The light could belong to travelers, like himself, caught in the storm. Or it could be something else entirely. With no better options, Lucas guided Penny toward the distant glow. As they drew closer, he could make out the outline of a small structure, not a ranch house or a homesteader's cabin, but something lower to the ground with a rounded top. A traditional Apache wickiup. Lucas hesitated. Relations between settlers and the Apache people had been strained for decades. While there had been no open conflicts in recent years, mutual distrust remained. Yet the bitter cold and the promise of shelter overrode his misgivings. He approached cautiously, dismounting Penny when they were about 20 yards from the dwelling. His legs nearly buckled beneath him, stiff from cold and hours in the saddle. He led his mare the rest of the way, stopping at a respectful distance from the entrance. "Hello," he called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I'm seeking shelter from the storm. I mean no harm." For a long moment, there was no response. Then the entrance covering was pulled aside, and a woman emerged, wrapped in a thick blanket. She was tall for an Apache woman, with intelligent eyes that quickly assessed him and his horse. "Rancher, we are shivering. Get in my shelter now," said the Apache woman without hesitation, gesturing urgently toward the entrance of the wickiup. "Bring your horse to the lean-to behind. Quickly." Her perfect English surprised him, but Lucas didn't hesitate. He led Penny around to the crude but effective shelter attached to the wickiup, grateful to find a small supply of hay inside. He quickly removed the mare's saddle and bridle, rubbing her down as best he could before securing a blanket over her shivering form. By the time he made his way to the entrance of the main shelter, his fingers were so numb he could barely push aside the covering. The woman was waiting just inside, and she reached out to help him, pulling him into the blessed warmth of the wickiup. The interior was dimly lit by a small fire in a central pit, the smoke rising to escape through a hole in the top of the domed structure. Despite its modest size, the wickiup was remarkably warm compared to the howling storm outside. The air smelled of pine, herbs, and wood smoke, an unexpectedly comforting combination. "Thank you," Lucas managed through chattering teeth. "I'm Lucas Keller. I have a ranch about 8 miles south of here." The woman nodded, guiding him to sit near the fire. "I am Pima Sunflower," she said, her voice low and melodious. "Most who know me call me Pima." Lucas registered mild surprise at her name. "You're named after the Pima tribe?" A smile flickered across her face, revealing a hint of dimples in her copper-toned cheeks. My mother was Pima, my father Apache. They thought it fitting. She handed him a clay cup filled with something hot. Drink. It will warm you from inside. The tea was bitter but warming, and Lucas drank it gratefully. As feeling returned to his extremities, he took the opportunity to observe his rescuer more carefully. Pima appeared to be in her late 20s, with long black hair that she wore in a practical braid. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes so dark they appeared almost black in the firelight. She moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of someone comfortable in her own skin. "You live here alone?" Lucas asked, realizing too late that the question might seem intrusive. Pima didn't appear offended. "My grandmother lived here with me until last spring. Now it is just me." She added another small log to the fire. "Most of my people have been moved to the reservation, but I have permission to remain here. This land belonged to my grandmother's family for generations." Lucas nodded, understanding the unspoken complexity behind her simple explanation. The government's policy of forcing Native Americans onto reservations had torn many families apart. That she had managed to remain on her ancestral land was unusual. "The storm caught me by surprise," he explained, feeling a need to justify his presence. "I was checking fences and lost my bearings in the snow. Many have died in less," Pima said matter-of-factly. "You were fortunate to find my home." "I was," Lucas agreed. "And fortunate that you were willing to take in a stranger." Pima regarded him thoughtfully. "The winter kills without discrimination. Apache, white man, the cold does not care." She pulled a rabbit skin from a nearby basket and handed it to him. "Your coat is wet. This will help." Their fingers brushed as he accepted the offering, and Lucas was struck by the warmth of her skin against his still cold hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice unexpectedly rough. As the night progressed, the storm outside intensified. Wind howled around the wickiup, but the sturdy structure held firm. Lucas found himself sharing more about his life than he had intended: his time fighting in the war, his decision to stake a claim in the Arizona territory, and his struggles to establish his ranch. Pima listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed her sharp intelligence. In turn, she shared stories of her people and her own life: how she had been educated at a mission school for a time, her return to her grandmother's home, and her determination to preserve her family's way of life while adapting to the changing world around them. "The agent from the Bureau of Indian Affairs visits occasionally," she explained. "He tries to convince me to join the others on the reservation. Says a woman shouldn't live alone out here." "What do you tell him?" Lucas asked, genuinely curious. Pima's lips curved into a small smile. "I tell him that my people lived here long before his government drew lines on maps, and that I am never alone when I am on the land of my ancestors." There was something in her quiet dignity that Lucas found deeply appealing. Unlike many of the settlers he knew, who viewed the native peoples with fear or contempt, he had always respected their resilience. His years in the war had taught him that courage and honor weren't confined to any one race or creed. As the night deepened, Lucas found himself increasingly aware of Pima as a woman. She moved with a natural grace, her hands expressive as she spoke. When she laughed at something he said, a rare but rewarding occurrence, the sound was rich and genuine. "You should rest," she said eventually, noticing his eyelids growing heavy. "The storm will not pass before morning." She arranged blankets and furs on one side of the wickiup, creating a comfortable pallet. Lucas, exhausted from his ordeal, accepted gratefully. As he settled down, Pima took her place on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance. "Sleep well, Lucas Keller," she said softly. "You are safe here." The warmth, the rhythmic sound of the fire, and the bone-deep weariness soon pulled Lucas into sleep. His last conscious thought was of Pima's face, illuminated by firelight, as she had welcomed him into her home. He awoke to the smell of something cooking. Opening his eyes, Lucas found sunlight filtering through the smoke hole above. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Pima was tending to a small pot over the fire, stirring what appeared to be a simple porridge. She looked up as he stirred, offering a brief smile. "The snow has stopped," she informed him, "but it is deep. Your journey home will not be easy." Lucas sat up, stretching muscles stiff from yesterday's ride and the night on the ground. "I've imposed on your hospitality enough. I should leave as soon as possible." Pima shook her head. Eat first, and the sun must melt some of the snow before you try to leave. Your horse needs rest as well. Her practicality was irrefutable. Lucas accepted a bowl of the porridge, a mixture of ground corn, dried berries, and nuts that was surprisingly satisfying. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the occasional pop from the fire and the distant call of a bird outside. After breakfast, Lucas insisted on helping Pima with her morning tasks. Together they checked on Penny and the small herd of goats Pima kept in a sheltered pen nearby. The snow was indeed deep, nearly knee-high in places, and Lucas realized that Pima had been right about waiting for it to melt somewhat before attempting the journey back to his ranch. As they worked, Lucas found himself drawn to the quiet strength of this woman who had carved out a life for herself against considerable odds. She was neither bitter about the injustices her people had faced nor resigned to them. Instead, she seemed to meet each day on its own terms, finding purpose and even joy in her solitary existence. By midday, the winter sun had done its work, reducing the snow depth considerably. Lucas knew he should prepare to leave, yet he found himself reluctant to do so. "I owe you my life," he said as they stood outside the wickiup, surveying the transformed landscape. "If there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness." Pima studied him for a moment, her dark eyes unreadable. "No debt exists between us, Lucas Keller. This is the way of humanity, to help one another survive." "Still," Lucas persisted, "I would like to return someday, to visit." He hesitated, then added, "If that would be welcome." Something flickered in Pima's expression, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. But then she nodded. "You would be welcome." As Lucas prepared Penny for the journey home, Pima packed a small bundle of food for him: dried meat, some of the corn cakes she had made that morning, and a small pouch of the tea they had shared the night before. "For strength on your journey," she said, handing him the provisions. Their hands touched again, and this time Lucas didn't immediately pull away. "Thank you, Pima Sunflower, for everything." The ride back to his ranch took longer than usual, with Penny having to navigate through the remaining snow. Lucas found his thoughts returning repeatedly to the wickiup and its solitary resident. There had been something between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their different backgrounds. His ranch hands were visibly relieved when he rode into the yard, having feared the worst when he didn't return before the storm hit. Lucas assured them he was fine, mentioning only that he had found shelter with a local during the blizzard. He wasn't sure why he hesitated to speak of Pima directly, except that the experience felt somehow private, something to be protected from casual discussion or potential misunderstanding. In the weeks that followed, Lucas found himself drawn repeatedly to the northern edge of his property. Finally, a month after the snowstorm, he saddled Penny and rode out to Pima's wickiup, bringing with him a gift of coffee beans and sugar, luxuries he thought she might appreciate. Pima seemed neither surprised nor displeased to see him. She accepted his gifts with grace and invited him to share a meal. This visit established a pattern that would continue through the remainder of the winter and into spring. Every few weeks, Lucas would ride out to visit, sometimes bringing small gifts, other times simply offering assistance with tasks that required strength or an extra pair of hands. Their friendship deepened with each visit. Lucas found in Pima someone who listened without judgment, who challenged his thinking without rancor, and who shared his appreciation for the harsh beauty of the Arizona landscape. For her part, Pima seemed to welcome his company, gradually revealing more of herself, her hopes, her fears, her quiet humor. It was during a visit in early spring, as they sat outside the wickiup watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, that Lucas realized he had fallen in love with her. The recognition didn't come as a shock, but rather as an acknowledgement of something that had been growing for months. "You're quiet tonight," Pima observed, glancing at him with those perceptive eyes. Lucas nodded, uncertain how to express what he was feeling. In the world they inhabited, a relationship between a white rancher and an Apache woman would face considerable obstacles. Yet he couldn't imagine turning away from the connection they had formed. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about how meeting you has changed me." Pima turned to face him more fully, her expression attentive but guarded. "Changed you how?" Lucas chose his words carefully. "Before the snowstorm, I thought I knew what my life would be. I had my ranch, my plans for the future. But now, he paused, gathering his courage. Now I can't imagine that future without you in it. A complex array of emotions crossed Pima's face: surprise, wariness, and something softer that gave Lucas hope. "What are you saying, Lucas Keller?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I care for you, Pima. Deeply. More than I thought possible." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "I know there would be challenges. I know people would talk. But if you feel anything like what I feel." Pima didn't immediately respond, but she didn't withdraw her hand either. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "In my life, I have learned to be cautious with hope. The world has not been kind to those who cross the boundaries others have set." "I know," Lucas acknowledged, "and I would never ask you to face hardship for my sake. But I also believe that some things are worth fighting for." He squeezed her hand gently. "You are worth fighting for, Pima Sunflower." A smile slowly spread across her face, transforming her serious features. "You have a warrior's heart, Lucas Keller." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his in a gesture of intimacy that took his breath away. "And yes, I feel it too." Their courtship unfolded slowly, respectfully, over the following months. Lucas introduced Pima to his ranch hands, men who, to their credit, judged her on her character rather than her heritage. Pima, in turn, took Lucas to meet the few members of her extended family who still lived outside the reservation, including an elderly uncle who regarded Lucas with initial suspicion that gradually gave way to grudging acceptance. The wider community was less accepting. Lucas faced disapproval from neighboring ranchers, lost business connections, and endured whispered comments when he and Pima rode into town together. Pima bore similar slights with dignity, though Lucas knew they hurt her despite her stoic exterior. It was after a particularly difficult encounter in town, when the wife of a prominent merchant had deliberately turned her back on them, that Lucas made his decision. Riding back to his ranch, with Pima beside him on the mare he had given her, he reined in his horse. "Marry me," he said without preamble. Pima looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Marry me," Lucas repeated, more gently this time. "I love you, Pima Sunflower. I want to build a life with you, not hiding away, not apologizing for what we feel." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I want to stand before God and anyone who cares to witness and declare that you are the woman I choose, now and always." Tears, the first he had ever seen her shed, welled in Pima's eyes. "You know what this would mean. Some doors would close to you forever. Let them close," Lucas said firmly. "New ones will open." Pima studied him for a long moment, as if assessing his resolve. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said simply. "I will marry you, Lucas Keller." They were wed the following month in a small ceremony that combined elements of both their traditions. The local minister, a progressive man who had come to know and respect them both, performed the Christian service. Pima's uncle conducted a traditional Apache blessing. Few people attended: Lucas's ranch hands, Pima's remaining family members, and a handful of friends who had stood by them despite community pressure. Their life together was not without challenges. Lucas lost business opportunities because of his marriage. Pima faced continued prejudice when she accompanied him to town. But on their ranch, which they expanded to include Pima's ancestral land, they created a haven of mutual respect and deep love. Over time, their commitment to each other and their fair dealings with everyone they encountered began to wear down some of the prejudice they faced. Not all of it. Some people would never change, but enough that when their first child was born a year after their marriage, visitors came bearing gifts and good wishes. On the 5th anniversary of the snowstorm that had brought them together, Lucas and Pima rode out to the wickiup, which they had maintained as a retreat from the bustle of ranch life. Their 3-year-old son, Michael, rode in front of Lucas, while their infant daughter, Sarah, was secured in a traditional cradleboard on Pima's back. As they approached the familiar structure, Lucas looked at his wife, still struck by her beauty and strength after all this time. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me?" Pima turned to him, her face softened by the happiness of the past years. "Never," she said with certainty. "The storm that brought you to my door was the greatest blessing of my life." Lucas reached across to take her hand, his heart full. And mine. Together, they dismounted and entered the wickiup, carrying with them the future they had built. One choice, one day, one act of love at a time. Thank you for listening to our story. Please rate it from 1 to 10 and let us know where you're listening from. We appreciate your support.